Hello everyone, this is yet another video on editorial analysis. Today I would analyze an article that featured in the Hindu, and this article is about Global Gender Gap Report, which has been recently released by the World Economic Forum. Now this report shows that India has high gender inequality. So in this video, students, we are going to talk about the report itself, the index itself, what are the various parameters that have been taken into consideration. We're going to talk about India's performance, contrasted with other countries, particularly the neighboring countries. And we would get to the root of it as to what are the reasons because of which India has high gender disparity. And we are also going to look at the various measures, the various schemes that the government has launched in order to make India gender equal, students. So let's get started on that note. Now, students, the article is titled Bridging the Gap on India's Gender Inequality. The Global Gender Gap Index for 2022 was released by the World Economic Forum, placing India at 135 out of 146 countries. Now, students, this is something you need to keep in mind, that the Global Gender Gap Report is released every year by the World Economic Forum. So when you cite these figures, it's important that you cite the source, that these are the figures provided by World Economic Forum, right? Now, India is 135 out of 146 countries. So when you say India is 135, that wouldn't be enough. You have to put things in perspective by saying that it is 135 out of 146 countries, right? I say this because you might have to use these facts and figures for your VAT and group discussion, right? So now, students, the article says that though India has been able to improve its ranking by 5 places, so India was 140 in 2021, students, but that was probably because, last year there were like more number of countries. I mean, the data set is different this time. So the total number of countries that participated is different this time, students. So it says that though India has been able to improve its ranking by 5 places, the new data hardly brings cheer, as India has fared the worst in at least one of the parameters, health and survival, in which it took the last spot, students. So overall, India has performed very bad. India is at 135 out of 146, but particularly in terms of health and survival, which is like one of the most important parameters on which this index is based. Students, India got the last position. India took the last spot, students. So health and survival primarily measures the sex ratio, right? The number of females for the ratio between number of females and males. That is one. And it also takes into consideration the health expectancy, students, life expectancy. So India has taken the last spot, students. The Global Gender Gap Index benchmarked the current state and evolution of gender parity across 4 dimensions. Now, it is important that you keep in mind the various dimensions that the index is based on. Economic participation and opportunity is one. Educational attainment is another. Then you have health and survival. And finally, you have political empowerment, right? Now, students, India ranks poorly among its neighbors and is behind Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and Bhutan, students. And if we talk about Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, perform worse than India in the region. So India, if we talk about this region, right? So India has performed better only than Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. It has performed poorly among its neighbor countries, students, like Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. And 2022, the global gender gap has been closed by 68.1%, which means at the current rate of progress, it will take 132 years to reach full parity, students. So even though the global gender gap has been closed by 68.1%, students, but if we progress at this rate, it will take 132 years to reach full parity. To enable females to realize their full potential, students, it will take 132 years, right? So that's humongous. And in fact, when this sort of highlights the significance of, intensified efforts by the government, that the government, a piecemeal approach will not help. The government will have to make some sincere, consistent efforts, students, towards closing the gender gap. And among all the regions, it will take the longest for South Asia to reach the target, 197 years, due to a broad stagnation in gender parity scores in the region, students, right? So South Asia, so India has performed poorly, that's one, but in fact, the whole South Asia region, students, sort of, it lags behind the rest of the world in terms of gender inequality. And there's a broad stagnation in gender parity scores in this region. Now, India, with a female population of approximately 66 crore students, has faltered on the road to gender parity, right? So we have this huge female population of 66 crore students, and we have faltered on the road to gender parity. In the pandemic years, as income shrank, women faced hurdles on every front, from food, health, education, girls' child to jobs. So students, the pandemic just worsened the things, particularly for the females, right? It broadened, it increased the gap, the gender inequality gap, students. And the latest NFHS data show that 57% of women are anemic, up from 53%. 88.7% married women participate in key household decisions, but only 25.4 women who worked in the last 12 months were paid in cash, students. Some more statistics. The article says that women having a bank account or saving accounts that they use have increased 78.6%. So that is some positive news. Similarly, students, here the fact that 88.7% of married women participate in key household decisions, that's some progress made, right? That means a woman's status within the household is getting better. And if we talk about the women's having a bank account or savings account, even that has increased thanks to the Jan Dhan Yojana, students. But women participation in the labor force has shrunk, students, right? So that's the reason we've performed badly in terms of employment opportunities. So the article says, students, this is the most important point the article makes, in fact, that do it right by women. How can we correct this situation? We can correct this situation if the women were to correct it themselves. They will have to take the ownership for this, right? They cannot wait for the society, the government, the men. The government will have to empower the women themselves to make a change to this situation, right? And increase representation of women in leadership positions at all levels so that women can get greater access to jobs and resources. Now, students, this is a widely held belief that if women were to given representation in leadership positions, if women were to make the leaders, they would pull up other women because they would be sensitive to the women issues. They would be sensitive to the problems and the challenges faced by women and their life dynamics. And hence they would make a concerted effort towards pulling up the other women, students, because they would identify with them. And government to move beyond tokenisms and help women overcome staggering economic and social barriers, students. So government needs to move beyond tokenism, beyond a piecemeal ad hoc approach, right? Or just paying a lip service to it, not doing anything meaningful, but only talking about it. Now, students, talking about the gender gap. What is gender gap? Gender gap is the difference between women and men as reflected in social, political, intellectual, cultural, or economic attainments or attitudes. So that's the gender gap. That's the difference between men and women in these various areas, right? Now, let's talk about India's report card, students. So if we look at the 4 parameters that the report is based on, they're political empowerment. Now, what is political empowerment, students? It measures the number of women in the parliament, women's participation in politics, and the number of women who hold ministerial positions, right? If we talk about economic participation and opportunity, that measures women's participation in the labor force, right? And also it also considers the wages drawn by women. Educational attainment, students, it measures the literacy rate, women literacy rate, and also the number of enrollments of women in primary, secondary, and tertiary education levels. And finally, health and survival, that measures the sex ratio, as well as the life expectancy, that how long are women actually living, how long do they survive. So it measures this. So here, students, if you see, we have performed the best in terms of political empowerment. We are ranked at 48, and our score is much higher than the average global score, students, right? That means we have made some progress in terms of women's participation in the politics. If we talk about health and survival, we have performed the worst, students, 146. We are 146 out of 146, right? Although we have made some progress from last year, however, we have performed dismally poor, students, being the last country in the world. I mean, even the third world nations perform better than us in this respect. In fact, we are the largest, we are one of the only large countries. We are one of the only important, significant countries in the world where, you know, there is such a poor state of women's health. And if we talk about educational attainment and economic participation, we have not been able to perform well in these areas as well, right? Now, students, coming to where does India stand amongst its neighbors? So India ranks poorly amongst its neighbors and is behind Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan. Now look at a small country like Bangladesh, a small country like Nepal, which are economically much inferior to us, students. Yes, Bangladesh is a highly populated country also. Yet they've performed really well, 71, right? And Nepal, 96. And the only countries like Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, the three countries which are hit by, you know, like terrorism, infested with terrorism and civil war and humanitarian crisis. So only these countries are worse than India in South Asia. In 2021, India ranked 140 out of 156 countries. Now, what are the global findings, students? Global findings: Iceland has retained its position as the world's most gender equal country, right? And Finland, Norway, Sweden, the Nordic countries are top 5 countries on the list respectively. These countries tend to do well in terms of human development in general also, students. New Zealand, of course, we know is one of the most developed countries. And Afghanistan is the worst performing country in the report, and no country has achieved full gender parity. And it says that South Asia will take the longest to reach gender parity, which is estimated to be likely in 197 years, students. So students, South Asia, I mean, this entire region is lagging behind other countries in terms of gender equality. Now, impact of COVID-19, students, it says that the progress towards gender parity has been halted and even reversed due to COVID-19 pandemic, students. Women have borne the brunt of recession, widely dubbed the recession, students, recession, right? It's a kind of a tongue twister, in fact. So you can call it she-session. So students, it said that women have borne the brunt of this recession, students, right? They have been worst hit, worst impacted by the recession, largely because they work in sectors that were most impacted, such as retail and hospitality. So these are the two sectors which see, you know, maximum labor force participation of the women, hospitality and retail. And these were worst hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic recession has hit women harder than 2009 financial crisis that impacted the male workers. Now, students, why gender equality? That is, why do we as a nation or as a world, you know, emphasize or stress on gender equality? Why should we strive for gender equality? How would gender equality help? Students, to enable women to participate fully in society. Now, this is very important, students. If we want to enable women to participate fully in the society, if we want them to bring their best contribution to the economy, if we want them to achieve their full potential, it is important that we close the gender gap. We reduce the disparities between men and women, because greater the gender gap, students, that means women have, the lesser the share women have in terms of job opportunities and other resources, students, right? So for women to participate fully in society, it is important that we close the gender gap. It is estimated that India can potentially boost its GDP by $700 billion by 2025 by raising female labor force participation rate, students. That means if we have more female workers, employed students, if we enhance their participation in the labor force, our GDP would get a boost by $700 billion, which is a huge figure, students. It makes all the economic sense also to not just on the moral grounds, but it makes complete economic sense also to improve gender equality, students. Please note down this figure, very important figure. If you get a topic in GD, anything related to gender, women empowerment, gender equality, you can cite this, the economic case for pushing for gender equality. Gender equality contributes to growth by raising the female to male ratio of labor force participation, increasing women's work hours, and having more women working in higher productivity sector, students. And equality at work goes hand in hand with gender equality in society. So if there is higher equality in the workplace, it would be reflected in the society, in the household also, students. And gradually the status of the women would get better, they would get uplifted within the society, right? And economically empowered women boost demand, have healthier and better educated children, and raise human development level, students. So because women is the caregiver, students, women raises children. So they're being educated and empowered, and they being able to realize their potential has a very, like a snowball impact, a very positive impact on the children. And children could be like both male and female, right? So basically gender equality doesn't help the female alone, but it helps the males too, and society at large, and the country at large, and the world at large, isn't it? So they would have healthier and better educated children, and they would raise human development levels. Now, reasons for gender inequality in India. Why do we have such high gender inequality in India, students? Number one, please keep it in mind, stereotypical thinking and patriarchal mindset is the biggest challenge, students, right? So there is a stereotyping of women. Women, the moment they are born, they are seen as um, caregivers, students. They are seen as mothers and wives of somebody, as sisters of somebody. They are not seen as beings with their own individuality, with their own identity, right? So there's this whole patriarchal mindset, students, which places females in a very inferior position. So that is one. There is a second, there is a culturally ingrained parental preference for son, students, emanating from their importance as caregivers for parents in old age. In India, we all know there's this huge preference for male students, right? And the reason is that it is believed that women would get married and would leave the house, but the male child, the son, would remain there to support the parents during their old age. So it is this belief that makes people families prefer female children. That's the reason we have such high female infanticide and feticide in the country, students. Declining child sex ratio, the practice of gender biased sex selection and child marriage, students. No wonder we have performed so poorly. We are last in the world. We've got the last position in terms of health and survival. That precisely takes into consideration the sex ratio and the life expectancy, students. So there's a practice of gender biased sex selection, students. People choose to have male students, sons, and very often kill the females in the womb itself or when they're born. Next, students, women often lack access to the financing needed to start or expand a business, right? So basically, there are very limited opportunities available to women in terms of employment. They are not as educated as men are, and that's the reason why most of the jobs go to men, obviously, because they're better educated and better trained. There's, of course, a systematic bias also against women. And but another reason is that women lack financing needed to start or expand a business. That women do not have enough entrepreneurial opportunities. We do not have an ecosystem that supports the women as much as it does the men. Globally, the value of women's unpaid work performed is 3 times higher than that of men students. That's not something unique to India. Of course, in India, the situation is relatively very bad. However, this is a global phenomenon, students. Then, students, there's unconscious bias in the workplace. In the workplace also, there's a systematic bias against women wherein it is believed that women at some point would drop from the workforce. They would withdraw themselves from the workforce, right? Because of their domestic responsibilities, because of their marital responsibilities, because of their household responsibilities, they would leave the job, right? So there is no sense in promoting them beyond a point. Though they comprise almost 40% of agricultural labor, they control only 9% of land, students, in India, right? So land ownership also, because land is a very critical asset, students. They can, women can get loans on the basis of their property, right? But that opportunity is not available to them. That option is not available to them because women don't own land. If you look at the inheritance laws in India, it's the male son, it's the son that inherits the property or the land. So in this aspect also, women are at a disadvantage, students. More than 50% of women have no valuable asset to their name. They don't have any valuable asset to their name, students. So financially, economically, they are weak. India has a lower share of women's contribution to the GDP than the global average, and women face great physical insecurity, and there are regular crime against women such as rapes, dowry deaths, and honor killings. Right? So there are the crime against women is also on the increase, students. So these are the various reasons why India is a highly gender unequal country. And now coming to students, what are the various initiatives taken by the Indian government to reduce gender gap in social, economic, and political life, students? So economic participation and health and survival. So what is the government doing to promote women's economic participation and to better their health and survival performance? So students, number one, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. This is one scheme of the government. Students, here we are talking about the various governmental schemes to support women to close the gender gap. One is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. It ensures the protection, survival, and education of the girl child, right? So it focuses on education and survival, protection of women. Beti Bachao, protect, and Padhao, educate. Mahila Shakti Kendras. So there are a number of these Mahila Shakti centers. There's a network of centers across the country, which aims to empower rural women with opportunities for skill development and employment, students, right? So Mahila Shakti, Shakti means empowering them, right? Developing their skills so that they can get better employment and better wages. Mahila Police Volunteers. Now, it engages Mahila police volunteers in states and UTs who act as a link between police and community and facilitates women in distress. So students, now you have to understand that it is believed that a lot of times, women are not able to, they're hesitant in sharing their problems or various instances of crime against them, their violation. They're hesitant to share these issues directly with people in the forces, in the police force, right? Who are majorly men. So therefore, students, they have, the government has established this Mahila Police Volunteers Force so that women can confide in them, openly speak to them about their problems and challenges. Next, students, Rashtriya Mahila Kosh. So this is an apex microfinance organization that provides microcredit at concessional terms to poor women for various livelihood and income generating activities. So this is to help the women financially to help them meet some financial exigencies. So basically it is microcredit and it is given at concessional terms to poor women. Then students, there's something called Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. Under this scheme, girls have been economically empowered by opening their bank account. So government opens a bank account in the name of the female child students, right? And usually a corpus is provided to support their education and other needs. In order to promote female entrepreneurship, the government has initiated programs like Stand Up India, Mahila A Heart, entrepreneurship and skill development program students. Lastly, students, we have Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya. They have been opened in educationally backward blocks. Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya, this is to increase women enrollment in schools. So, usually women do not travel long distances to study. So therefore, they have been opened in educationally backward blocks. Political reservation students, government has reserved 33% of seats in Panchayati Raj institutions for women. So basically here, Panchayati Raj, we know it is about empowerment at the grassroots level. That is the third tier of governance students. So government has reserved 33% of seats in Panchayati Raj institutions for women. That means women necessarily, they are placed in 33% of the seats, right? So there's been long-standing demand for women reservation across all the tiers of the governance. However, that has not seen the light of the day. But the girls or the females have certainly got reservation in the Panchayati Raj institutions too. Coming to capacity building of elected women representatives, so it is conducted with a view to empower women to participate effectively in governance processes. So students, it was observed that even though women, because 33% seats are reserved, right? So women were getting elected to 33% of seats because they're reserved. But somewhere the women were not participating as actively in the political processes. Most of the time, students, it was their husbands who was controlling, who had the remote control. So here we have this capacity building of elected women representative scheme, which empowers women so that they could participate effectively in the governance process. So these are the various schemes and measures that have been taken by the government to promote gender equality, students, or to empower the women, right? So that's all for this video, students. I'll see you next time with another video on editorial analysis. Thank you so much.